All right, so we can get started now, and then more people can join as we speak. All right, so today I want to talk to you guys about something we all do and almost never really think about while we're doing it, and that is taking risks. Not just the big ones like gambling, investing, skydiving. I mean, like the small ones too, sending texts while driving, hitting refresh on a stock app, saying yes to one more drink, let's say. We tend to explain these moments with willpower, with character, with I should have known better. But in this talk, I want to make the case that almost none of that is the real story. The real story is happening really inside of your skull in circuits that were built for a completely different world than the one you're making decisions in right now. I'm Amirali, the founder of U7 Initiative, and I'm going to talk about this fascinating topic today, the neuroscience of risk-taking, which is incredibly complex, like the neuroscience of everything else, but really has a lot of interesting things that can tell you about a lot of the behaviors that define who we are. So let's start with the paradox, because I think this is what makes the topic worth, 30 minutes or so of your time today instead of 5. So people who are smart, informed, or even experts still tend to make bad risk decisions all the time. Why is this? We'll talk about 3 things in particular, as outlined in these bullet points, and I'm going to let them land instead of rushing through them so you can think about them yourself as I explain them to you. So firstly, a trader who knows the odds, who has the statistics in front of them, still rides a losing position all the way to 0 instead of cutting it early. Um, and this really speaks to the sunk cost fallacy in a lot of ways. But, you know, even experienced traders still make these mistakes all the time. Another one is a driver who can recite the exact statistics on distracted driving, but still looks down at a text on their phone as they're driving, going 70 miles per hour or whatever. And another one is a gambler who understands the house edge perfectly well, still feels in their gut that the next hand is due rather than stopping and taking the money that they've earned through gambling. So here's the thing. This isn't a stupidity problem, and it isn't necessarily a discipline problem either. If it were, then giving people more information would fix it, and it doesn't, not reliably. What I want to convince you of in this session is that this is an architecture problem. I'm talking about the architecture of our brain. Your brain has 2 different systems that are constantly in this tug of war and making every decision that you make, and they don't necessarily agree with each other. And one of them is actually a lot louder than the other one, and also a lot faster. That is really today's question for this session. What's actually happening in there in the seconds before you make a risky choice, and why does it so often overrule what we know to be true? So let's meet these 2 systems that I'm talking about. On one side, you've got the limbic system. This is the fast, emotional, automatic side of the brain. It includes the amygdala, which we'll get into in a minute, the striatum, which is central to how you process reward, and the dopamine pathways that run through both of them. This system evolved to react in milliseconds, really fast. It does not wait for you to finish thinking. It was built for a world where hesitating for even half a second in front of a predator was the difference between living and not living. So it jumped straight to action a long, long time before philosophy or something like financial literacy existed. On the other side, you've got the prefrontal cortex at the front of your brain. This is the newest part of the brain, evolutionary speaking, and it's also the slowest to develop in each of us individually. It's not fully wired until your mid-20s, around 25. This is the part that weighs consequences, holds your actual goals in mind, and can, when it's working well, override the impulses from the limbic system. And here's the part that matters most for this session. The prefrontal cortex is also the first system to go quiet under stress, under fatigue, under strong emotion. It's a very sensitive part of the cortex. Exactly when you need it to referee the most, the referee, being the prefrontal cortex, is the one that is most likely to leave the room, unfortunately. And that really ties to, it's the amount of time it's had to develop. Your prefrontal cortex, again, is the newest part of your brain, hasn't had as much time to develop. And that's why in certain situations, like I said, when you're stressed, fatigued, or under strong emotions that are driven by your limbic system, it tends to shut down in a sense, and it's not in the driver's seat. And so every risky decision that you make is really a negotiation between these two systems, and the outcome of it depends a lot on which one is the loudest in that particular moment, and not necessarily which one is correct. So let's zoom in to the fast system first, starting with the amygdala. This little almond-shaped structure can flag a potential threat in about 12 milliseconds. For context, a single blink takes somewhere around 100 to 400 milliseconds. So your amygdala has already made a call on whether something is dangerous before you've even physically finished blinking, which is insane. And this is also long before you've consciously registered what you're looking at. Now, a few things worth sitting with here. First, uncertainty itself activates this circuit, not just confirmed danger. Your brain doesn't need to know that something bad is happening. It just needs to know that it is happening, and that ambiguity alone is enough to trip the alarm. This is a big part of why unpredictable situations feel stressful even when nothing has actually gone wrong yet. Second, once that alarm is triggered and your amygdala is activated, it recruits your entire body before your prefrontal cortex even gets a vote. Your heart rate changes, attention narrows, posture shifts, all before you've had a single conscious thought about the situation. And third, this one's important for anyone dealing with chronic stress, especially repeated stress actually enlarges this circuit's influence over time and shrinks the prefrontal cortex ability to talk it down. So if you've been in a stretch of chronic stress, your alarm system isn't just louder in the moment, it's actually structurally gaining ground over your brakes. Now let's flip to the reward side. And when I talk about reward, you probably think about dopamine, and yes, that is what I'm going to talk about, because I think this is the single most misunderstood piece of neuroscience and pop culture. Everyone calls dopamine the pleasure chemical, and that's not really accurate, because dopamine is better understood as a prediction signal, not a pleasure chemical. And I'm going to explain some evidence for that. Dopamine neurons fire most when an outcome is uncertain, not when it actually pays off. If you give an animal or a person a completely predictable reward, the same treat, the same paycheck, the same result every single time, the dopamine signal barely moves after a while. But make that reward unpredictable, create some kind of anticipation, make it variable, and the signal spikes hard, especially in the moment of anticipation, before you even know what you got. And this explains something that used to really puzzle researchers in neuroscience. Why does a near miss feel almost as good as an actual win? Slot machine players know this instinctively. 2 cherries and then almost a third. That near miss recruits nearly the same reward circuitry as an actual win does. Your brain treats, that so close feeling as functionally similar to a yes or a win, essentially. And that's not a coincidence. It's, that things like slot machines, loot boxes in video games, infinite scrolls, social feeds, they are all explicitly engineered around this same exact mechanism. Variable, unpredictable reward is the most addictive pattern that your brain can be exposed to. And it's not an accident that so much of the modern economy runs on it. Now let's talk about why your brain is also bad at math. Specifically the math of gains and losses. I'm not talking about like calculus and things. This comes from the work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, prospect theory, which won a Nobel Prize actually. And the headline finding for it was that the pain of losing $100 is roughly twice as intense psychologically as the pleasure of gaining $100. The same number, but completely different emotional weights. This single asymmetry explains a huge amount of irrational financial behavior. It's why investors hold onto a losing stock way too long, not because they think it's going to recover, but because selling stocks in the loss and locking in a loss feels almost unbearable compared to just not looking at it. It also means that how a choice is framed changes what people pick, even when the actual math is identical. Tell someone they have a 70% chance of keeping their job, and they react completely differently than if you tell them there's a 30% chance they'll be laid off. Same number, totally different decision. It's very psychological. And of course, there's, again, the sunk cost fallacy, the thing where you keep going to a movie you're not enjoying because you already paid for the tickets. That's loss aversion stretched out across time, essentially. Walking away doesn't just feel like accepting you wasted something, but it just feels like losing twice. And of course, we don't like to lose. The feeling of losing it's way worse than winning, even though it's the same quantity in a sense, but in opposite directions. So here's something I think people really underestimate. Your risk tolerance is not a fixed personality trait. It changes from hour to hour, depending on your internal states, not on the actual odds in front of you. And that's what accounts for a lot of these decisions that you make in different situations. So take something like acute stress. When you're stressed, your system floods with hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and that narrows your attention and tilts you toward fast emotional decisions over slow, deliberate ones. You are quite literally a different decision maker under stress than you are when you're calm, even though the math of whatever you're deciding hasn't even changed at all. Sleep loss does something even more specific. This is why sleep is very important, by the way, because a lack of it weakens the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, which is a very, very crucial connection. So when you're sleep deprived, the brakes don't just feel weaker, they're structurally slower to respond right at the moment that you need them the most. This is why the same person can make a completely sound decision on a Tuesday morning and a wildly different one at 1 in the morning after a stressful and sleepless week. It's not, a different person. It's the same person, but it's just running on a different state of the same hardware, essentially. And so risk doesn't happen in isolation either. It's deeply social, and this is one of my favorite things in the field. Merely being watched by peers raises activity in your brain's reward circuitry during risky decisions, even when absolutely nothing about the actual risk has actually changed. The math of the bets is identical whether you're alone or being watched, but your brain treats it differently. That's the key of this. There's also a kind of social contagion to risk. Watching someone else take a risk, and you might, relate to this yourself. When you watch someone else take a risk and, succeed, primes your own brain to underweight the downside the next time you're in a similar spot. So you didn't run the numbers again, you just watched someone else win and your risk calculus quietly shifted. And, you became overly confident that you're also going to win. And you don't really think about that risk you're about to take when typically 9 times out of 10, the odds are against you. And groups amplify this even further. The average risk a group lands on is often higher than what any individual member would have chosen alone. That's not because everyone in the group is reckless or anything, it's just a group dynamic. And this circuitry, again, is loudest of all during adolescence, when the reward system is already at peak sensitivity and the prefrontal cortex still has years left to mature. Again, doesn't mature fully until the age of 25. So when we talk about teenage risk taking, which is obviously a very hot topic, the honest answer isn't they don't understand the danger. It's that the reward feels a lot more intense to them, especially with peers watching, while the braking system is still mid construction. Now, I want to take a moment here because I think this deserves to be said plainly. A lot of modern technology is not accidentally exploiting these circuits. It is deliberately engineered around these circuits, actually. Slot machines are the clearest example of this. Variable, unpredictable, payouts on every single pull, and that near-miss experience isn't a side effect, it's a design feature because it keeps the dopamine signal firing while, without having, that house actually pay out. You don't gain any money, but just being close to gaining it seems to fire that dopamine that would be fired if you were to win on a slot machine. And the same thing applies to trading apps and betting apps. They do the same thing, but with a different costume. Real-time price ticks, live odds that update constantly, let's say throughout a game. These recreates the exact same unpredictable, anticipation-driven pattern as a slot machine. They're just dressed up, differently as financial literacy or sports knowledge instead of just pure luck and entertainments that you would get at a casino, let's say. And I want to be clear about something. Knowing this mechanism doesn't make you immune to it. I know it, you know it, or at least you now know it, and none of us are actually suddenly immune to all of this. What it does is make you harder to fool by it because you can recognize the pattern instead of mistaking the feeling of anticipation for the feeling of having actually made a good decision. So given all that, what actually works here? Not vague advice like use more willpower. No, that's not really going to help because we've just spent, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes establishing why that's not a reliable lever. These are just tools that work with the architecture instead of against it. So I'm going to give you some tips here. First, pre-commit before the moment. Decide your exit points, your position size, your walkaway line while you are calm and not driven entirely by those emotions and rewards. Not mid-bet when the limbic system already has the floor and the prefrontal cortex is essentially offline. Second, add friction, a short delay, an extra step, a confirmation screen before a risky action gives the slower system time to load back in before you act. And this is why some trading platforms and some self-imposed rules use a deliberate pause. It's not bureaucracy for its own sake. It's giving your brakes a chance to catch up. Third, reframe the loss. Ask yourself what a stranger would do holding this exact same position right now, not what you've already sunk into defending it. That question really sidesteps the sunk cost trap, almost entirely. And last but not least, name your state, not just the odds. Before you check the numbers, check whether you're stressed, tired, or excited, because we've established that those states change how you weigh the exact same risk. Again, stress, fatigue, these things really impair your decision-making ability because your prefrontal cortex is not able to function properly in those states. So you have to name your state, and that can really change everything because knowing your state is itself the most useful information when it comes to taking risk and understanding your own brain and behavior, which can allow you to, in the long run, make better decisions overall. And now here's where I want to leave you. Your brain is not broken, absolutely not. It's running software that was built for an ancestral world, not a casino floor or a trading app or a betting app. Every mechanism we talked about in this session, the fast amygdala, the prediction hungry dopamine system that you have, the asymmetry between gains and losses, sunk cost fallacy, everything, all of it made excellent sense to us humans for hundreds of thousands of years of our history. And it just wasn't built for slot machines or 24-hour markets, in the modern day, in this modern world, where technology governs much of our lives and is very useful, but also can really trick us into doing things that we have not been evolutionarily primed to deal with. And the goal of all of this was never zero risk, and I don't think it should be. Risk is how anything interesting gets done, right? I mean, you should take risks. Shouldn't always play it, easy and cool, because it's taking risks can, if it's not in something that can harm you in any way or doesn't have tremendous losses, it can lead to great things, and I'm not talking about betting or casinos or gambling. No, don't do any of that. But when it comes to other things in life, taking that kind of pushes you out of your comfort zone, even if you don't feel comfortable doing it. And ultimately, risks can lead to great rewards, much greater rewards than if you try to play it cool and easy, and not push yourself out of your comfort zone. So no, absolutely not. The goal is never zero risk. I don't think it ever should be, okay? Risk is how anything interesting gets done, once again. And the thing is, the goal is choosing your risk on purpose, with the slower system actually given a real seat at the table instead of getting overridden every time. And I'm talking about your prefrontal cortex. Give yourself time to think through things before actually making a decision, before taking a risk for something, not simply being driven by your emotions and rewards, because 9 times out of 10, that will lead to some kind of loss that, believe me, you would not want to get. And that doesn't start with some big resolution. It starts the next time you feel the pull, the next time your heart rate ticks up before making a decision. And you give yourself 1 extra second to notice it. And that 1 extra second is, believe me, the most important second, because, sorry, I'm just getting a call. That 1 extra section makes the biggest difference. And if you don't give yourself that time for your prefrontal cortex to think through something and actually make a good choice on the kind of decision you want to make, it will stab you in the back. And believe me, that is not what you want. So thank you so much for listening. I'd love to open it up for questions now. If you have any questions, you can just raise your hand up, shout it out, whatever, type it in the chat, whatever format you'd like, just go ahead.